Tonight, we're going to be going over the different medications, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, ADHD, and psychotic disorders, as well as the medications associated with them. Give easy ways, but before I get into any of it, do not memorize anything, but be able to recognize and apply the information to exam questions, because this is oftentimes people get distracted. They're like, well, I know the antidepressants, I know the anti-anxiety meds, I know the mood disorder meds, I know the psychotic meds, I know ADHD medications, but when I see it in a question, I'm not really able to memorize it or notice every nick and cranny of it. So do not have the goal of being able to memorize it, be able to recognize and apply it, because that's going to be the best thing that you can do for yourself when walking into the exam and taking it. And I'm going to try my best to give easy ways to differentiate all the different disorders and the medications from one another. But without further ado, let's start at the top. Antidepressant medications, and I'm going to have the brand name and the generic name. So for those that are like, which one should I know? The exam kind of varies on which one, but I have easy ways to remember both sides. The generic name are going to have more generic ways of remembering it, so more global. And then on the brain name, I'm going to give easy ways to remember each of those. But if you have your own, then feel free to utilize those. But let's get started. So on the generic name of antidepressants, there's going to be INE at the end of them. So if you see INE at the end of a medication and you see a question describing symptoms of depression or depressive symptoms, then the likelihood of that being the medication that you want to go with is likely. So that's where you want to make sure specifically that if you are like, oh my God, I'm not sure, that you identify the correct symptoms. And then if you see INE at the end, know that the likelihood of it being an antidepressant goes up. And on the brand name, this is where we can get a little bit more clever. So oftentimes people are like, man, I get them mixed up. These are just easy ways that I have people be able to remember the antidepressants. And starting from Zoloft, it helps to loft the person's mood to a more positive land. Effexor positively affects the person's mood, while Butrin helps the person to feel well. Trazodone helps the person's depression to be done. Celexa helps to select the person's mood to be more positive. Lexapro helps the person feel like a pro. And Prozac helps a person feel like a pro as well. So on the generic side of antidepressant medications, INE are going to be the ways to be able to differentiate those from other medications. However, there is going to be another class of medications a little bit later on that uses INE as well. But for the sake of it, as of right now, INE, the likelihood of it being an antidepressant is very favorable. And then on the brand name side, Zoloft helps to loft the person's mood. Effexor positively affects the person's mood. Wellbutrin helps the person to feel well. Trazodone helps the person's depression to be done. Celexa helps a person to select a positive mood. Lexapro helps a person feel like a pro. And Prozac helps a person to feel like a pro as well. So stated in a different way, most of the generic names have INE at the end. And on the brand name side, if the ways that I came up with right now are clever and helpful for you, then rep and rock with those. But if you want to come up with your own names, then do that as well. And now the disorders associated with them are going to be the depressive disorders. And the easiest way to remember how many depressive disorders there are possible, or most commonly, is based on the length of time each of them are required. And what do I mean by this? So major depressive disorder, think of major is a major event in the person's life. So if it's a major situation, it's not going to be a long period of time. Why? Because it's a major thing. And if you have a major event or major situation, you're going to have to react a little more quickly. So major depressive disorder is going to require 5 or more symptoms. But again, don't get hung up on the nick and cranny and everything. But for the sake of it, major depressive disorder, 5 or more symptoms being present within the same 2-week period. And if you look closely, 2-week period, the number 2 is going to be able to help you remember how many depressive disorders there are and the length of time for each of them. So major depressive disorder, major event, something that is major is something that is done in a short period of time. So 2 weeks or longer. And this is where major depressive disorder gets kind of tricky, because it has to have at least one of the following of, let's call them the gatekeeper symptoms of depressed mood and or loss of interest or getting less pleasure from things that they would have enjoyed otherwise. So they have to have one of these two gatekeeper symptoms and then 4 of the additional symptoms that are available, or they have 2 or both gatekeeper of them and they need 3 of the other ones. So if somebody has depressed mood or loss of interest or getting less pleasure than they would have enjoyed, then we can move to the rest of the criteria or symptoms, which are significant weight loss, change of around 5% of the person's body weight without dieting or trying to lose weight. And that is going to be the key thing, is because if someone's exercising more and trying to lose weight, and you see that your client is losing weight, or in the question, it's like says that they're going to lose more weight and they're dieting, this one does not count. Insomnia or hypersomnia. Insomnia, not sleeping. Hypersomnia, meaning they're oversleeping nearly every day. Psychomotor agitation or retardation, so moving quicker than you would have otherwise or moving slower than they otherwise would have done if they weren't in a depressed mood. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day, so being tired very quickly without much effort. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive inappropriate guilt or remorse for things that they would have done, so kind of ruminating thoughts or fixating on things that maybe they've done or maybe they perceive that they've done to people. Lack of concentration or motivation around completing tasks, indecisiveness around completing tasks nearly every single day. Should I do this? Having a long list of things that they want to do, not really ever being able to stay focused on them, or bouncing from task to task and or just running out of gas when they were going to do it. And then recurrent thoughts of death, not fear of dying, but wanting to die, recurrent suicidal ideations without a specific plan, or a serious suicide attempt with plans, means, and intent to actually execute. So, major depressive disorder, 5 or more symptoms, same 2-week period. And then keep in mind, the number 2 is going to be significant in just a little bit. And they have to have at least one of the following gatekeeper ones: depressed mood, loss of interest, or getting less pleasure from things that they would have enjoyed. If they do not have one or both of these, they cannot unlock major depressive disorder. But if they can, then it unlocks the 7 other criteria. Let's segue into the specifiers. So the symptoms cause a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning and social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. That's going to be a given for most disorders. And the episode is not attributable to the physiological effects of substance use or another medical condition. Why? Because substances and medical conditions can mirror mental health conditions. And if they have one or both of those, then we're not going to be able to diagnose this or be able to perceive that the person has actual depression. In the occurrence of the major depressive episode is not better explained by another mental health disorder, schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, schizophreniform, delusional disorder, other specified or unspecified disorders. And there's not been a manic or hypomanic episode, because if there's been a manic or hypomanic episode, we're looking more at a bipolar 1 and or bipolar 2 disorder. And we'll get into those in just a little bit. But just to do our due diligence, those are the specifiers related to major depressive disorder. And the second depressive disorder is going to be persistent depressive disorder. Key emphasis on persist. Why? Because it is going to persist over time. So major depressive disorder was a major event. Persistent is where it's going to persist over time. So this is going to be a depressed mood for most of the day, for more days than not, as indicated by either subjective accounts of the symptoms or observations of others. So other people can notice this person's symptoms and not have to directly come from the person. And this is where the number 2 is going to come back for at least 2 years or longer. So the depressive disorders, there are 2 of them. It's either going to be 2 weeks or longer, or 2 years or longer. And that's going to be for our adult clients. In children and adolescents, it can be irritable in duration of at least 1 year. So for adults, they kind of have the easy way for us to remember 2 depressive disorders, either 2 weeks or 2 years. And then kids, they love messing up everything. So they are going to have 1 year or longer. And this is where it's not going to be 5 or more symptoms. It's only going to be 2 or more of the following symptoms. And if you noticed, we do not have our gatekeepers blocking it because it's persist over time and has more of a profound impact. So they have to have 2 or more of the following symptoms for at least 2 years for adults or 1 year longer for children: poor appetite or overeating, insomnia, so not sleeping or hypersomnia, oversleeping, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration, and feelings of hopelessness. And those are going to be similar symptoms to major depressive disorder, but not as specific because if something persists over time, it's going to be less definable. So during the 1 or 2 year period, the disturbance has not been without criteria for more than 2 months. So if they have a loss of symptoms or their depression improves for 2 months or longer, they would not qualify for persistent depressive disorder. They would then segue back into major depressive disorder. Why? Because criteria for major depressive disorder may consistently be present for 2 years for adults or 1 year longer for children. So there's not been a manic or hypomanic episode, and criteria has not been met for cyclothymic disorder. In cyclothymic disorder, we're not going to specifically get into it in this session, but it is where they do not meet full criteria for a hypomanic episode, and they do not meet full criteria for a major depressive episode for 2 years or longer. So that is where they have a lower and milder form of a bipolar disorder and a milder form of depression. And the disturbance is not better explained by a persistent schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, or other specified schizophrenia disorder, and the symptoms are not attributable to physiological effect of substance use or another medical condition, and the symptoms cause a clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So, kind of a quick review on our depressive disorders. Again, easiest way to remember the length of time for each of them is they both involve the number 2 weeks or 2 years or longer. And for major depressive disorder, again, they have to have one or both of the gatekeeper criteria: depressed mood or loss of interest, getting less pleasure from things that they would have enjoyed. That's 5 or more symptoms. And then persistent, again, it persisted over time. So it's going to be 2 years or longer, or for children, 1 year or longer. And there is not going to be an absence of more than 2 months, because if that's the case, it's going to segue to MDD again. And it's not attributable to the physiological effects of substances and or medical condition. Let's segue into the next class of medications and disorders: the anti-anxiety medications in anxiety disorders. And on the generic side, again, we can have a more generic way of remembering them. They are going to have Pam and Lam at the end of them. And what I always tell people is Pam needs anxiety meds to handle her Lam because they're out of control and make her anxious. So if you notice, Pam and Lam are at the end of almost all of the anti-anxiety medication. So if you see Pam or Lam and your question has anxiety symptoms in it, the likelihood of it being one that has Pam and Lam at the end are a lot more likely than the ones that do not. And on the brand name side, I can come up with clever ways to help you, but if you have your own, rep and rock with those. Because again, if I propose something that isn't going to actually work for you, then trust yourself, stick with what has worked for you, and then go from there. However, what I always tell people to remember the brand names is Xanax helps you X out the person's anxiety. Klonopin helps to put a pin in the person's anxiety to reduce it. Volume helps to turn down the person's anxiety, so the volume of the person's anxiety. Ativan, a little bit more aggressive, but bear with me. Ativan will beat up the person's anxiety, throw it in a van, and drive it away. Boost Par helps the person's anxiety be more on par. And Librium helps the person to have a more equal Librium. So, kind of a quick review. Generic name are going to have Pam and Lam at the end of each of them, because Pam needs anxiety meds to handle her Lam because it makes her anxious. And then the brand name, Xanax, helps to X out the person's anxiety. Klonopin puts a pin in the person's anxiety to reduce it. Volume turns down the volume of the person's anxiety. Boosts Par helps the person's anxiety to be more on par. And Librium helps the person have a more equal Librium. And those are just easy ways to remember the generic and brand names. So let's get into the disorders often associated with these medications. And with the anxiety medications, similar to the depressive medications, they're going to have similar lengths of time. And the easiest way to differentiate them from one another are based on specifier words in the title. And that's where a lot of times people are like, man, do I have to memorize everything? You do not have to memorize anything. You just have to be able to recognize and apply them to specific questions. So let's get into it. So, generalized anxiety disorder is where the person is going to be anxious in general. They don't really have a theme for why they're anxious. They are simply going to have anxiety based on no particular thing, and it is going to just be in general. So, stated in a different way, someone has excessive worry more days than not for longer than 6 months. And keep in mind that 6 months is going to be our flagship and common theme among the length of time. So if you see an anxiety disorder, the likelihood of the length of time being 6 months or longer is very likely, with one pesky one that doesn't follow that theme, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. And for generalized anxiety disorder, they have to have 3 or more of the following symptoms: restlessness or feelings of being on edge. So ready to react on any given moment. So let's say like something's going to happen. So they're like hyper vigilant and they're just ready and don't want anything to be outside of the control. Easily fatigued. So getting up and ready to do a task, and then you're tired without even understanding why you're tired. And you haven't done actions that would explain being so tired. Difficulty concentrating or thoughts moving in multiple directions, feeling like you have to do a ton of things, not really having the energy or being able to stay concentrated on any of them. So you don't really accomplish a whole lot. Or if you do, it's kind of like a procrastinated reaction. Irritability or shouting on people, which kind of goes hand in hand with being on edge of, if someone says one wrong thing about you and you're anxious, you're just going to pop off without even meaning to. Muscle tension. So if you find yourself being a little bit more sore, then you may have anxiety. And then sleep disturbance, not being able to sleep, and just having your mind run 100 miles an hour. So the anxiety or worry has a clinically significant impact on the person's life, and the disturbance is not better attributable to another mental health disorder or substance use intoxication and or withdrawal. Why? Because if you're intoxicated on a stimulant, drug, the likelihood of you being more upbeat and fired up and doing a ton of stuff it's going to be more likely. Why? Because think about it. If you infrequently have caffeine and you don't have like an attention disorder, then it's going to make you feel like you have a ton of energy. Same thing if you amplify it to like a cocaine, a crack, or methamphetamine, that is a more intensified stimulant. But nonetheless, if somebody is utilizing substances, it's harder to tag on to a mental health condition because they mirror mental health conditions and symptoms. So, kind of a quick review: generalized anxiety disorder is where the person is anxious in general for 6 months or longer. So, again, that is going to be like our flagship or like common thread among the anxiety disorders is the length of time. Because if it's not 6 months or longer, then we're not likely looking at something different. And the next anxiety disorder is going to be social anxiety disorder. So, just like generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder is going to be fixated on social or social situations. So, generalized anxiety disorder, the person was anxious in general. Social anxiety disorder is where the person is anxious in social situations. And then there are no common social situations of where it is, because if the is select situations, we may be looking at a selective mutism. But getting back into the social anxiety disorder, it is a marked fear or anxiety about one or more social situation in which the individual is exposed to possible scrutiny by others. So, for example, social interactions, having to have a conversation, meeting new people, etc., being observed, like eating, drinking, anything along those lines, or performing in front of people, giving a speech during an ASWB study group, etc. Any possibility of people scrutinizing you or criticizing you, and it does not have to be actual criticism, but perceived criticism. So in children, the anxiety must occur in peer situations and not during interactions with adults. Why? Stranger danger. You don't want kids comfortable talking to everybody. Heck, adults aren't even comfortable talking to everybody. So why would you put that expectation? So again, it must be in peer situations for children. So if somebody's anxious while talking to an adult and they're a child and the question tries tricking you, do not be fooled, because if it's with an adult, that would be the expectation. So questions can throw those little daggers at you to test and see if you know the nick and crannies. But again, don't memorize anything, but be able to recognize and apply those details. And the individual fears that he or she will act in a manner that will be negatively evaluated. Additionally, if they show anxiety symptoms, they may feel like they could be negatively viewed as well. So people think social anxiety disorder is where the person avoids the social situation at all cost. Not the case. They can engage in that social situation and endure the anxiety, and then it could fuel the monster of, man, if I show that I'm anxious, then people are going to negatively evaluate me even further. And then it can create a cyclical nature. So the social situation almost always provokes anxiety or fear. In children, the fear or anxiety may be expressed by crying, tantrums, freezing, clinging, shrinking, or failing to speak in the social situation. So this is where, if it is a new situation for somebody, there is going to be a perceived anxiety or like kind of worry. And that simply is because one, it's new to you, and two, you care, but it almost always provokes the anxiety or fear. So that's the thing is, people are like, well, I get anxious in social situations. And it's like, are they new to you? Yes. Okay. Then you may not have that social anxiety. It just may just that you have anxiety or worry because you care about the situation. And the social situations are avoided or endured with intense fear and anxiety. Like I said, it's not that they always avoid the situation. They may go through with the activity anyhow, but then continue on and have more internal conflict with themselves. The fear and anxiety is out of proportion to the actual threat posed by the social situation. And that's what I mean is it's out of context. So if this was my first study group that I was ever giving, of course I'm going to be a little worried or I'm going to be a little anxious, like I said at the beginning. Like, this kind of makes me a little worried as I do it. But as I go on, I get more comfortable because one, I just get into my zone. And two, it's just something that I enjoy doing. But if I was always thinking as I'm going along, man, hopefully they understand, or like, man, you're stumbling over words, or man, they're just going to boo you out, or no one's ever going to attend, you guys would almost be like, what is this dude talking about? Because it's not an actual posed situation. Of course, I may make mistakes, I may missay things, or I may miss details, etc. But it's not where you guys are just going to gun for me and be like, all right, where's he located? So we can just go burn him down. Because again, at the end of the day, it's out of what is actually possible within the situation. And the fear, anxiety, or avoidance is persistent with lasting at least 6 months or longer. And that's what I was saying is similar to the depressive disorders. The 6 months or longer is the anxiety realm of that consistency. So if you feel it is an anxiety disorder and the length of time is 6 months or longer, understanding what the specifier is, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, separation anxiety disorder, etc., then you'll be able to parse through it. Because at the end of the day, of course, you'll be able to recognize the anxiety, but you have to understand the specifier to be able to differentiate the difference. So, kind of a quick review of social anxiety disorder. It's where somebody is going to be anxious in social situations outside of the context of what would be normally expected, or they may endure the situation with intense anxiety and then be worried about what people's reactions are to their anxiety. And it's for at least 6 months or longer. The next disorder is going to be separation anxiety disorder. Key emphasis on separation. Why? Because when they are separated from a significant person or figure in their life, they will become anxious. Generalized anxiety disorder, they were anxious in general. Social anxiety disorder, they were anxious in social situations. Separation anxiety disorder is where they are anxious when they are separated or they perceive that they will be separated from a significant person in their life. Stated in a different way, it's where developmentally inappropriate or excessive fear or anxiety concerning the separation from those whom the individual is attached, as evidenced by at least 3 of the following symptoms. And this is where it's going to be out of the context of what would be expected, but it's all based on the separation. So let's get into these. Recurrent or excessive distress when anticipating or experiencing separation from home or from a major attachment figure in their life. So every single time this is going to happen. Persistent and excessive worry about losing a major attachment figure in their life or about possible harm to them, such as illness, injury, disaster, or death. So, this is where somebody is always worried about somebody that's significant to them dying, becoming sick, or something catastrophic happening to them. And it's going to cause them to be by themselves. Persistent worry or excessive worry about experiencing an unexpected event, them getting lost, them being kidnapped, them having an accident that causes separation from their major attachment figure. So it's not just worry about something happening to their attachment figure, but it could be them being worried about something happening to them, which would subsequently separate them from that attachment figure. So they have excessive worry they're going to be removed from it. They have persistent or excessive worry something bad's going to happen to their attachment figure, or they have persistent or excessive worry that something's going to happen to them. They have persistent or excessive refusal or reluctance to go out, go away from, to school, work, or any place from their major attachment figure because of fear of something happening to them or the attachment figure. And if you see a theme, it's anytime they're away from the person, they become anxious or have a negative situation happen. So persistent and excessive fear or reluctance about being alone or without their major attachment figure at home or in other settings. So if they're alone, they worried what's happening to their major attachment figure, or they think, what is my major attachment figure thinking about me? And are they worried about me? Persistent reluctance or refusal to sleep away from home or go to sleep without being near their major attachment figure. So again, if I'm not near them, is somebody going to harm them? Or if I'm away from my major attachment figure, is somebody going to harm me? Repeated nightmares involving the theme of being separated from their attachment figure. So that sleep disturbance element, and repeated complaints of physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, nausea, and or vomiting when separated from their major attachment figure or when an anticipated separation occurs. Again, it does not even have to actually be happening, but they can anticipate it, become physically ill, which would negatively impact their ability to be separated. Because if I'm physically ill, then my major attachment figure has a lower likelihood of being away from me. And the specifiers here is the fear, anxiety, and avoidance is persistent and last at least 4 weeks in children. Again, children love messing up our themes. Of course, I'm just kidding. In adolescents and typically 6 months in adult. So the adults hold it strong in 6 months or longer. So similar to a previous disorder, children tend to mess up the length of time. So persistent depressive disorder is the previous one it messed up, where it was 2 years for adults and 1 year or longer for children. Same thing with this one, is the 6 months or longer was holding strong until the children wanted to be at least 4 weeks. And the disturbance causes clinically significant impact or distress in social, occupational, or other important or impactful areas of functioning. And the disturbance is not better explained by another mental health disorder, such as refusing to leave the house because of excessive resistance to change, autism spectrum disorder, delusions or hallucinations concerning separation in a psychotic disorder, etc. So they're oriented times 4, and they don't have autism spectrum disorder. So kind of a quick review. Separation anxiety disorder is where somebody is anxious when they are separated or they perceive that they'll be separated from their major attachment figure. They worry about something happening to them, something worrying happening to themselves, and or the major attachment figure. They're worried about being away from the major attachment figure. They have nightmares about something bad happening to them or their major attachment figure, and they'll have physiological symptoms based on the separation in 4 weeks or longer in children, or at least 6 months or longer in adults. So again, the easiest way to remember the anxiety disorders is 6 months or longer in adults. And of course, in this one, the children like messing it up with 4 weeks or longer. And then one that messes up all of our common themes is panic disorder. Key emphasis on panic. Why? Because this is where somebody is going to have panic and or have panic attacks related to different situations within their life. So panic disorder is in and of itself its own entity because the length of time is going to be messed up and the presentation of the symptoms are going to be totally different. So stated in a different way, someone will have recurrent unexpected panic attacks. A panic attack is an abrupt surge of intense fear or intense discomfort with the onset sometimes being unknown. So this is where sometimes people can be able to identify the triggers they have. Other times their panic attacks come with no warning and they just have to react to them when they do happen. And they have to have 4 or more of the following symptoms. And as we get into these symptoms, you're going to notice they're vastly different than the previous anxiety disorders that we went over. So sit back and let's see what they look like. Heart palpitations, so pounding heart, sweating, trembling or shaking, shortness of breath, feelings of choking, chest pain or discomfort, nausea or sensations to vomit, feeling dizzy, chills or overheating, numbness or tingles throughout the body, derealization. So feeling like things are not real and they may be outside of their body. So they're observing themselves from above, fear of losing control, and fear of dying. So the huge theme here is a lot of theirs is going to be physiological sensations within their body. And that's where if you see a question that has a lot of physical symptoms involved in it, in the length of time meshes down well with this, and it doesn't explicitly say panic attacks, we may have panic disorder be the most likely answer because the length of time we're looking at here is at least 1 month or longer because it has to have at least one panic attack within the last month and must have one or both of these. So this is kind of like a gatekeeper for panic disorder, similar as major depressive disorder had its 2 gatekeeper criteria. So persistent concern or worry about additional panic attacks occurring or fear of having a heart attack, and a significant maladaptive change in behavior to avoid having a panic attack or perceived ability to prevent one, such as avoiding exercise. Why? Because when you exercise, you're likely going to have a heartbeat that is faster. You're going to be sweating, you're going to be shorter of breath, and you're going to feel a little bit dizzy and or woozy because you want to avoid that sensation. So you're like, I'm done exercising because I think I'm going to have a panic attack. And then you change your life based on your presence of previously having a panic attack. And that's why I said panic disorder kind of messes up everything because the symptoms aren't that similar and the length of time is totally different. So, kind of a quicker view of panic disorder, they have to have a panic attack with the onset known or unknown, 4 more of the following. So, a lot of physiological symptoms that occur within the last month, so 30 days or longer, and they have to have one or both of the gatekeepers of persistent worry about having another panic attack or heart attack, or they need to make changes within their life to reduce the likelihood of having a panic attack or experiencing the same sensations that a panic attack would have had on them. And the symptoms are not better described by another physiological or psychological disorder or substance use intoxication or withdrawal. Again, not another medical condition, another mental health disorder, and or the use of substance uses in any way, shape, or form. Let's segue into the next class, which would be our mood stabilizers and or mood disorders. And this is where it gets kind of tricky because there are no clever ways to be able to remember the generic and brand name. So this is kind of where you have to be able to recognize specifically what they look like and then compare them to questions. So lithium, Depakote, Lamictal, Leporic acid, and the AP is going to be for antipsychotic. Why? Because some of the antipsychotic medications are going to be able to double as mood stabilizers. So Haldol, Risperidol, Latuda, and Abilify. And as I stated, there aren't any real easy ways to be able to remember the mood stabilizers because there's no way to manipulate the words in any way to make it easier. But let's get into the disorders often associated with them. And this is where a lot of times people get it mixed up. Bipolar 1 disorder and bipolar 2 disorder. People will hear these concepts and go, I've no clue, or I know some of it, but I don't know the rest of it. And that is where let's try to make it as simple as we possibly can, because a lot of times people will blow it up and be like, oh my God, I heard one of them requires a depressive disorder, or the other one doesn't, or this one's more severe, or this one's less severe, or aren't they both severe? And let's sit back and let's see what we got. So bipolar 1 disorder most commonly has manic episodes. So if you remember anything about bipolar 1 disorder, manic episodes, because it requires more commonly to have a manic episode. Hypomanic episodes, which can be present within bipolar 1 disorder, which makes it trickier, are not present within bipolar 2 disorder. So, stated in a different way, someone will meet the criteria for a manic episode, which does not mean it requires, it may have been preceded, which means prior it had a hypomanic or depressive episode, and may does not require it, may have been followed by a hypomanic or depressive episode. So hopefully I planted the seed that it has to have a manic episode, but does not require an episode of depression. It does not require an episode of depression. It can, but it does not require it. And I'm hammering this home because that is going to be one of the major differences between its cousin, bipolar 2 disorder, because it does not require an episode of depression. Let's get into what a manic episode looks like. So, a manic episode is described by 3 or more of the following and has to be present for 1 week or longer. So, if we look at it, bipolar 1 week or longer. Bipolar 1 week or longer. So, the name tells you the length of time. Bipolar 1 week or longer. And it needs 3 or more of the following symptoms. So let's go through them. Inflated sense of self or grandiosity. So somebody thinking that they're better than they are, feeling like they can conquer anything. So that inflated sense of like, man, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to make all these business moves. I'm going to make all these things. And then decreased need for sleep. This could be feeling rested after only 3 hours of sleep or going days without sleep in a row. More talkative than normal, or they feel pressured to have conversations with everyone they meet. So if they're in a crowd, they're talking to everyone, they're bouncing off the walls, they're just having that flight of just hyper verbal, just everything that comes to their mind. And if it's silent, they feel like they have to fill that noise or that silence, that flight of idea, or where their thoughts will run through their head and they're not able to slow them down. So they're like, I need to do the dishes. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to do this. 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 And it's like they want to accomplish a ton of things and they can't really ever keep up with their thoughts. So it's like they have 100 miles an hour of thoughts going through their head. And then it just kind of immobilizes them and exhausts them because they can't really understand what their mind is telling them to do, but they know they have a ton of energy and they want to accomplish it. They could have distractibility or find it difficult to stay on track. So they may start the dishes. They may be doing an ASWB study group. They may start creating a calendar. They may start vacuuming the floor. They're going to clean their bathroom, go back to the dishes. And then they never really ever complete anything because they start something and never really finish it because they're just bouncing from everything to everything without even really noticing that they are. They could have increasing goal-oriented activities. They may be doing things that they wanted to, which could feed into the grandiosity. They're starting a business. They're doing all these things that they wanted to. They're like, I'm going to research this. I'm going to read this book and I'm going to be coming and doing all these things. So they start trying to do things that can help propel their life further, but they aren't maintainable things for them to do, or they just lose interest in it and don't really ever get the reward of being able to do it. And they can have excessive involvement in activities with high potential for painful or negative consequences, spending money they do not have, engaging in a lot of sex, substance use, and or foolish business ideas. So they have that negative impact on their situation where it is going to be over the top of what you would expect someone to do. So the specifiers here, the mood disturbance is sufficiently severe to cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning, or to necessity of hospitalization to prevent harm to self or others, or they have psychotic features. Stated in an easy way, symptoms have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, hospitalizations, self-harm, or homicidal ideations. And this is going to be the second way to differentiate bipolar 1 from bipolar 2. So the two main differences, it does not require an episode of depression, but it does require a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. and the episode is not attributable to the physiological effects of substance use or another medical condition. So bipolar 1 can have manic episodes, but it can also have hypomanic episodes. However, keep in mind that hypomanic episodes are often associated with bipolar 2 disorder. So bipolar 1 disorder can have both manic and hypomanic episodes, but it primarily has manic episodes, and it can have fluctuations with hypomanic episodes. So let's look at hypomanic episodes. A hypomanic episode is described as 3 or more of the following and must be present for 4 days or longer. And as I stated before, bipolar 2 disorder is often associated with hypomanic episodes, but bipolar 1 disorder can as well. So that's where the length of time is different. Is hypomanic episodes are 4 days or longer, and manic episodes are 1 week or longer. And as we go through it, the symptoms are going to look fairly similar because they are the exact same, but let's go through them anyway. So inflated sense of self, of esteem, or grandiosity. And again, the criteria is going to be the same, 3 or more. So inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity, thinking they're better than they actually are, or that they can accomplish more than they actually can. Decrease for need, feeling rested after only 3 hours of sleep, or go multiple days in a row without sleep. More talkative than normal, or feel pressure to have conversation with everyone that they meet. So they may just be going off random tangents to talk to everybody. Or if it's silent, they feel like they have to fill the void and do everything and keep up with everyone and do all these different things. And they may not even have anything substantial to talk about, but they just continue to go about it. Flight of idea, where their thoughts will run and someone can't really keep up with them. So it's like the thoughts are going 100 miles an hour and they're wanting to do all of these things, but they're not ever really able to keep up with them or keep track of them. And it's like kind of frustrating because if you want to accomplish something and you have a ton of ideas going through your head, it's going to exhaust you before you've been able to do it. Distractibility, or finding it difficult to stay on track. Again, doing the dishes, doing a study group, making a calendar, vacuuming the floor, going back to the dishes. You left the food out, so now the food's not good, and not really ever being able to keep up with the things that you would wanted to have done before. Increasing goal-oriented activities. So starting business ideas, reading things, enrolling in trainings, doing all these different things without ever really being able to finish them. But you want to increase your quality of life by being able to do it. An excessive involvement in activities with high potential for painful or negative consequences, spending money they do not have, engaging in a lot of sex, utilizing substances, and or foolish business ideas. And it's not maintainable in any way, shape, or form. However, the main difference between a hypomanic and manic episode are the following. The episode is associated with an unequivocal change in functioning that is uncharacteristic of the individual when not symptomatic. So, stated in a different way, it's a noticeable change of somebody's behavior. And when they aren't in the hypomanic episode, they are a totally different person. So, other people may be like, man, like Phil's doing a ton of videos. He just put out 5 videos in a row, and it's normally every other week. And now he just put 5 days in a row. Like that's out of the norm for this guy. Of course, I'm not hypomanic, by the way, but that would be an example of like, he normally doesn't do that. Why is he doing that now? And the disturbance in mood and the change in functioning are observable by others. The episode is not severe enough to cause marked impairment in the social or occupational functioning or to necessity of hospitalization. If there are psychotic features, the episode is by definition manic. Stated in a different way, it does not have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. And I know this is still under bipolar 1 disorder, but as I stated at the beginning, bipolar 2 disorder is associated with hypomanic episodes. So a huge difference between bipolar 1 disorder and bipolar 2 disorder is bipolar 2 disorder does not require clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, where manic episodes, they do have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. And the last specifier is the episode is not attributable to the physiological effects of substance use or another medical condition. And then let's segue into the cousin of bipolar 1 disorder. Bipolar 2 disorder and most commonly associated with hypomanic episodes and depressive episodes. So in bipolar 1 disorder, it required a manic episode, but did not require an episode of depression. Bipolar 2 disorder has hypomanic episodes and it requires an episode of depression. So stated in a different way, this is where someone will have met the criteria for a past or current hypomanic episode and met the criteria for a past or current major depressive episode. So, stated in a different way, it requires someone to have an episode of depression. So, that is a huge difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder. Is bipolar 2 disorder does require an episode of depression. Bipolar 1 disorder did not require that episode of depression. In an easy way to remember the length of time, bipolar 2, 2 plus 2 equals 4, because that is how long hypomania is 4 days or longer. So a hypomanic episode is described as 3 or more of the following and must be present for 4 days or longer. So again, bipolar 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, 4 days or longer. Or if you want to think about it in a different way, kind of a funnier way, bipolar 2 is the second version. And if you think of movies, the sequel tends to be half of what the first one would have been. So bipolar 2 disorder is half of the first version. So half of a week is 4 days or longer. And if you noticed, the hypomanic episode that was present within bipolar 1 disorder is the absolute same that is in bipolar 2 disorder. So inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity, so thinking that they're better than they are or have more power than they actually do. Decreased need for sleep, so feeling rested after only 3 hours of sleep or going multiple days in a row without sleep. More talkative than normal or feeling pressure to have conversations with everybody that they meet. So they're going off on different tangents. If there's any silence, they'll do everything that they can to fill it. And they just want to talk and share everything that they know with everybody. Flight of idea, where their thoughts are going 100 miles an hour. They're not able to slow them down, not even really able to notice what their mind is telling them to do. Or they share the most common ones that they can because they have hyperverbal. Their distractibility or find it difficult to stay on task. They start multiple tasks. They're not ever really able to finish them. Increase in goal-oriented activities. They want to read a ton of books or they buy courses. They're never really able to finish them, but they have good intentions when they do. Excessive involvement in activities with high potential for painful or negative consequences. Spending money that they do not have. Engaged in a lot of sex, substance use, and or foolish business ideas. The episode is associated with an unequivocal change in functioning that is uncharacteristic of the individual when non-symptomatic. The disturbance in mood and the change in the functioning are observable by others. The episode is not severe enough to cause marked impairment in the social or occupational functioning or to necessitate hospitalization. If there are psychotic features, by definition, it is a manic episode. Stated in a different way, it does not have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. Again, one of the big details for bipolar 2 disorder is it does not have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, and the episode is not better attributable to the physiological effects of substance use or another medical condition. And kind of a quick review in between them before we differentiate the overarching differences. Bipolar 1 disorder commonly has manic episodes. It does not require an episode of depression. It can. They will have manic episodes. It has a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. Bipolar 1 disorder can have manic and hypomanic episodes. And bipolar 2 disorder only has hypomanic episodes, and it requires a depressive episode, and it does not require a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. So you would not be able to have both bipolars because bipolar 1 encompasses bipolar 2, which would be the hypomanic episodes, But bipolar 1 disorder requires that clinically significant impact, which would be the necessity of hospitalization, self-harm, homicidal ideations, and the psychosis. Because if somebody has psychosis and or that clinically significant impact, it would not be bipolar 2 disorder. It would inherently be bipolar 1 disorder. And if you're like, Bill, that was super fast, I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to recall all the symptoms or criteria on the exam. The easiest way to be able to remember the manic and hypomanic criteria or symptoms is dig fast. So if you think of somebody that's manic or hypomanic, just picture somebody digging really, really fast, because each letter in dig fast represents the criteria. So D, distractibility; I, increasing goal-oriented activity; G, grandiosity; F, flight of idea, so where their thoughts are going 100 miles an hour; A, activities that could be risky; S, sleep deprivation; and T, talkativeness or feeling like they have to engage in speech with every single person. So if you think about it, dig fast. If you picture somebody digging fast and not really going anywhere, then we have somebody that is manic and or hypomanic. So to differentiate them and to make sure that it's clear, mania, which is associated with bipolar 1 disorder, bipolar 1 week or longer. So the length of time is going to be specified for us, and it's going to have that clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, and it does not require an episode of depression. So kind of some celebrity examples: Britney Spears when she shaved her head and got wild on the paparazzi; Charlie Sheen when he thought he had tiger's blood and that he had superpowers. Hypomania, on the other hand, is associated with bipolar 2 disorder. 2 plus 2 is 4, or since it's the second version, it's half of the first. So half of a week is 4 days or longer. It does not require a clinically significant impact on someone's functioning, and it requires an episode of depression. So an example of this is somebody that is overproductive at work. They get fixated on tasks. They're more productive with their time, and they find it difficult to do one thing. So picture somebody at your job that is just flying off the handle. They're coming up with a ton of ideas. They're wanting to talk with everybody while everyone else is working, and they never really are able to get the tasks done, and they have to be reminded over and over to do things. So that is where the person has a change in their behavior. So you have somebody at work that is normally very poignant. They get things done, and then they flip into a hypomanic episode. They come up with a ton of ideas. They're talking 100 miles an hour, and they're not really able to accomplish things. So it has an impairment on their abilities, but it wouldn't be so much so that they need to be hospitalized. So those are the differences between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder. The next class of medications are the ADHD medications. And for the generic name, if you look closely, it has feta and fiend in the middle, because people fiend for their feta cheese, and when they don't have it, they become distracted. So feta and fiend in the middle of the generic names. And on the brand name side, I don't really have a clever way to be able to recognize those, but if you see them, you often are able to associate them with ADHD. Adderall, Concerta, Ritalin, and Vyvanse. And on the generic side, there's feta and fiend in the middle, because people fiend for their feta cheese, and when they don't have it, they get distracted. And it's associated with ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And there are two types of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's inattention, and then there's hyperactivity impulsivity. And then the third is going to be a combined, but we have to propose the first two presentations before we have our combined presentation. So let's get into this. The first subtype that we'll look over is inattention. And the criteria is going to be 6 or more symptoms of inattention for children up to the age of 16 years old. so 16 years and younger, and 5 or more symptoms for adolescents 17 years old and older and or adults. So as somebody ages, the amount of criteria of symptoms that they need goes down. So 6 or more for 16 years and younger, and 5 or more for adolescents 17 years and older. And the inattention symptoms must be present for 6 months or longer. So they have to have 6 or more symptoms for 16 years and younger for 6 months or longer, and then 5 or more for adolescents 17 years and older or adults for 6 months or longer, and cause impact that is disruptive and inappropriate for their developmental level. So keep that in mind as we go through the different criteria. So they have to have 6 or more for 16 years and younger, and 5 or more for 17 and older or adults. So 6 or 5 of the 9 following criteria. So often fail to give close attention to details or make careless mistakes in schoolwork or at work or with other activities. So it's difficult for them to notice different things, and they may skip over them, they may rush over them, or they may not notice or get caught up in the details. They often have trouble holding attention during task or playing activities. They often get diverted off, or they just do things that half of what they thought would have been done. And it's difficult for them to stay in one spot. They may go to the next task and the next task because they get bored very easily. They often seem like they're not listening to the rules. So if somebody's talking to them, they may want to get into the activity so much faster than everyone else that they're just not listening. They listen to half of what they would have wanted to hear in order, and then they'll be asking questions about rules that have been told to them prior. Often seems like they are not listening to others when being spoken to as well. So it's not just associated with tasks they may not seem important. They just may be off in their own little world. They may be thinking about different things. They may be wanting to do different things than they're actually doing. So it's like they're not actually paying attention, or they're able to pay attention to the person, but they have to be distracted and stimulated in other ways in order for them to pay attention, which sounds kind of backwards for somebody that has no exposure to ADHD, because they're like, wouldn't that be more distracting for the person? But no, it's a way for them to be more attentive, but it may seem like they're not actually listening to other people. They often have difficulty with organization or organizing tasks and activities. So, order to them may look totally different than other people. Other people may say that's kind of messy. How do you even notice this? Where's everything at? But people with ADHD and attention, they have their own organizational system, or they just know where things are, or they lose things very often because they forget where they put them, but they've organized it in a way that they're able to find it very easily for themselves. And they often avoid tasks that they dislike, or they're reluctant to do tasks that require a lot of mental effort over a long period of time, such as schoolwork, work, or household chores. So it's like they have to do the chore and then move on to the next thing, or they have to kind of be incentivized to complete the task, or they're just kind of procrastinate until the very last minute. So they're procrastinators to the max. They often lose things necessary for tasks and activity, schoolwork materials, pencils, papers, homework, house keys, instructions, cell phones, anything that you can imagine. It tends to get lost. So that's why people that have ADHD and attention often find ways to place things in consistent spots, or as I stated before, their lack of organization may be organized in their way. And if somebody comes in and changes their organizational system, they may lose things more so than prior to it happening. They often get distracted by the things around them very easily. So it's like kind of like swear, they're just all over the place, and they will be like, man, that's a really cool thing over there. Or, that's cool over there. And then which can get them back to, as I stated before, them not being stimulated by different activities for long periods of time because they could get distracted on things that they perceive to be more helpful than they actually are. And they are often forgetful of daily activities. So it's hard for them to be able to remember things. And if they don't write things down, they tend to forget, or they write things down, forget where they wrote it down at, and then end up forgetting the task anyhow. So, kind of a quick review of inattention. They find it difficult to stay focused on one task at a time. They may find it difficult to listen to things over periods of time. They may have a different organizational system than other people. They may forget things, they may lose things, or they may just stop doing things in general based on the fact that it has lost their attention. So that is what the inattention subtype looks like, let's go to the other side of the river of hyperactivity and impulsivity. And the criteria amount remains the same. So they need to have 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity for children up to the age of 16 years old or 16 years and younger. And then 5 or more symptoms for adolescents 17 years and older or adults. And the hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms must be present for 6 months or longer. So that remains the same. So 6 or more symptoms for 6 months or longer for 16 years and younger, and then 5 or more symptoms for 6 months or longer for 17 years and older or adults. And it causes that impact that is disruptive and inappropriate for their developmental level. So they have to have 6 or more for 16 years and younger, and 5 or more 17 years and older or adults for 6 months or longer of the 9 following criteria. And they are as follows: often fidget with or tap their hands, feet, or simply squirm in their seat. So it's like they're just having an engine and have to be moving around and doing different things. And that is how they kind of can keep themselves focused. Or it's just like they need to be doing something because they have so much energy and all over the place. They often leave their seat in situations or remain in their seat as expected. So they may be in school, they may be at work, and they just stand up and they start doing different things around. And other people are like, man, what's this person doing? But they may have finished their work or they lost their attention on the work and they're just doing what they feel is expected, or they just simply want to socialize. They often run about or climb in situations where it's not appropriate, where adolescents or adults could be just simply restless. They feel like they need to be doing a ton of things. They just are like pent up and they're just wanting to do everything. But this could be a kid just standing on the desk. They could be climbing over desks. They could be just be running around the room because they have 100% energy and they never really falter or waver on that energy level. They often are unable to play or take place in leisure activities quietly, or they bounce from task to task. So similar to inattention, they may go from this task to this task, or they may be noisy while doing their task, and they want other people to be involved in the task. They often seem to be on the go, as acting if driven by a motor. As I said, their energy is just all over the place. They never really tire. They never really waver. They're just bouncing off the walls 100% of the time. They often talk excessively or without much direction. They may go from this topic to that topic to that topic to that topic to this topic to that topic to this topic to that topic. And a lot of times people are like, what's the difference between mania and ADHD? ADHD is 6 months or longer. Bipolar disorder, the manic episodes are a week or longer or 4 days or longer. So that's the difference among this is they don't have that huge clinical significant impact of risk taken and all of those things associated with the bipolar disorders. And they often blurt out answers even when the question isn't finished. So it's like, and it's like, wait, what? And they don't let anyone else take their turn. They're very impatient. They want to get the job done. They don't really like waiting and doing things that other people would have done. So they'll blurt out answers before the question is finished. They often find it difficult waiting in line for their own turn. So they may want to skip the line or they may run in and barrel through everybody. It's because they think everyone else is slower than they are, or they just want to get going and doing the fun activities, quote unquote. And it can cause a lot of disturbances with other people. And they often interrupt or intrude other people's conversations, games, etc. Again, they don't really like waiting and being patient in the situation. So they'd rather jump in, they'd rather get in things rolling and going, even if it is inappropriate or rude within the context of the situation. So, kind of a quick review: somebody that's super active, they're always moving, they always have to be doing something, they're jumping from place to place to place. It's like they have an engine, they're climbing places, or they're restless. They find it difficult to be patient or wait in line. They want to jump in and share what they think the answers are or their thoughts. And they often will interrupt or intrude on situations. And in addition to the 9 or the 18, depending on if we want to combine inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity, they have to have the following conditions: several inattentive or hyperactive impulsivity symptoms were present before the age of 12. So the criteria have to be present prior to the age of 12. Several of the symptoms are present in 2 or more settings, such as home, school, work, with friends or relatives. So oftentimes we want to see it happening in 2 settings. And this is where a lot of times people get blown away on questions because it will be in one setting. And they're like, but this says it has to be in 2 or more. It says the majority of them have to be present in 2 or more. So do not let the little details throw you off the path and get you an incorrect answer. Because again, you don't have to memorize every nick and cranny, but you have to be aware of being able to recognize and apply them on exam questions. And there's clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of the person's social, school, or work functioning. And the symptoms are not better explained by another mental health disorder, such as a mood disorder, like we were saying, bipolar 1 or bipolar 2, an anxiety disorder, dissociative disorder, or personality disorder, and the symptoms are not happening as a result of the psychotic disorder or schizophrenia. And as I was saying before, there are 3 types of presentations that we can have. There's a combined presentation, so they have to have 6 or more inattentive in 6 or more of the hyperactivity impulsivity for 16 years and younger, and 5 or more of inattentive and hyperactivity impulsivity for 17 years and older or adults. And it has to be within 6 months or longer. And the predominantly inattentive have enough criteria for inattentive, so 6 or more for 16 years and younger, 5 or more for 17 years and older in adults, but not for hyperactivity impulsivity, and it's happened within 6 months or longer. So within the last 6 months, which would be 6 months or longer. And then predominantly hyperactivity impulsivity, enough criteria is met for hyperactivity and impulsivity, but not for inattention, and they're happening in the last 6 months or 6 months or longer. So combined, they have enough criteria for both of them. Predominantly inattentive, they have enough criteria for the inattentive subtype, and then predominantly hyperactivity and impulsivity, they have enough criteria for the hyperactivity and impulsivity, and it's 6 months or longer. So those are the 2 subtypes of ADHD and how we can see what they can look like. Let's segue into the next class, which is antipsychotic medications and the schizophrenia spectrum. And on the generic side, if you look closely, we can see INE in done. And before you're like, Phil, I thought you said the antidepressants had INE at the end of them. They do, but the antipsychotic ones tend to sound a little harsher, and the majority of them have done at the end. So if you see INE and done at the end of it, there's a likelihood of it can be an antidepressant based on the INE, but the done is specifically the antipsychotics. So that is where, if you see INE or done, the generic side of antipsychotic medications are the likely answer. And on the brand name, I don't really have a clever way to recognize all of them, but there are a couple of them, because Abilify helps to improve the person's ability to handle their psychosis. Seroquel puts a quill into their psychosis to turn it down. Clozaril closes the door on their psychosis to make it done. And those are the easy ways to remember. The generic side has INE or done at the end. In the brand name, just a couple of them. Clozaril closes the door on their psychosis. Abilify improves their ability to handle their psychosis. Seroquel puts a quill into their psychosis to change their situation around. Let's look at the disorders often associated with it, which is the schizophrenia spectrum. And this is where a lot of times people get themselves tripped up. Is there like the length of time? What are the different things? And the easiest thing to remember about the psychosis or schizophrenia spectrum is the length of time is the main thing that differentiates them. So don't get yourself tripped up, because the length of time is the biggest deciding factor. But let's look into it. So brief psychotic disorder is a brief amount of time. So think of something brief. We're looking at 30 days or less. So anytime you see brief psychotic disorder, it's 30 days or less. So similar to like major depressive disorder, where it was a major event, brief psychotic disorder is a brief situation. So 30 days or less. So brief psychotic disorder is a thought pattern disorder in which the person will experience short, gross motor deficits in reality testing manifested by at least one of the following, and it must be 1, 2, and or 3. And the length of time is 1 to 30 days or 30 days or less. So let's look at the criteria. Delusions, false beliefs that are not based in reality, and the person refuses to give them up even when presented with the factual information. And that's the key, is oftentimes when people are presented information to better inform their situation, they often adapt to the things that can be helpful for them. But this is where they are so hell-bent on their perspective being correct that they just are living in that delusional situation of they're presented with facts or evidence that what they believe is not true, but they continue to believe it. Hallucinations, audio, visual, tactile, olfactory. So hearing, seeing, feeling, or smelling things that are not actually there or that other people cannot experience as well. Disorganized speech, saying things that do not make sense, using made up words that have no meaning, and or tangential speech where the person skips from topic to topic with no common theme. So this is where, similar to like mania, they'll be talking about just different things. I could be talking about the presidents. I could be talking about how to pass the exam. Then I start talking about iPads, and then I start talking about aliens, and then I start talking about how I'm going to become the next president. And then I segue back into how to pass the exam. And then it's no common theme amongst the different things because people would say, what the heck is he talking about now? Thought we were talking about the meds and DSM, and now he's talking about being the president and aliens and how we're in danger and how the government's after him, etc. And it's kind of that word salad of skipping from different things and not really ever being able to have people understand you. Disorganized or catatonic behavior. So repetitive, senseless movements or adopt and oppose which could be maintained for an hour. So that could be where I have my arm up for an hours on end, not really ever getting tired with it or putting it down, or if somebody is going to force it down, I could stay in that pose for as long as I want as well. And again, they have to have at least one of 1, 2, or 3. So they have to have delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. And the ancillary ones are disorganized or catatonic behavior. And the specifier here are symptoms are not better explained by depressive disorder with psychotic features or bipolar disorder with psychotic features or another psychotic disorder such as schizophrenia. Catatonia is not better attributable to the physiological effects of substance use or another medical condition. So, kind of a quick review of brief psychotic disorder. It's a brief amount of time. So, it's 30 days or less of delusions, hallucinations, and or disorganized speech. And it could have disorganized or catatonic behavior in there as well. The next rung on the spectrum is schizophrenia form. If you look closely, we can see the word pre because it's the pre form of schizophrenia. So if you think about it, brief psychotic disorder was 30 days or less. So it has to be in between that point. So it has to be more than 30 days. And if you know schizophrenia, the heavy hitter, it's 6 months or longer. So it has to be in between those. So it is at least 1 month, yet less than 6 months, and it requires at least 2 of the following. So 2 of the following symptoms for at least 30 days, but less than 6 months. And symptoms 1 to 4 are considered positive symptoms. And an easy way to remember this is think of somebody that's positive. They're upbeat, they're high energy, and their mind's going 100 miles an hour. And this is where a lot of times people are like, well, what's the difference between positive and negative? Negative symptoms, think of low energy, and somebody that's negative, they're not really progressing in their situation. And this is going to make a little bit more sense as we get into it, because if somebody is experiencing a lot more positive symptoms, they're going to have a lot more energy. And if they're experiencing negative symptoms, they're going to have less energy. So they have to have at least 2 or more of the following for longer than 30 days, yet less than 6 months. So similar to brief psychotic disorder, just a couple more added. Delusions, false beliefs that are not based in reality, and the person refuses to give them up, even when presented with the factual information. Again, key emphasis on even when presented with factual information. So you can believe something, and if somebody presents you information, you often change your opinion. But if someone's delusional, they may not believe that what you're saying is true, or they may feel like you're in on the ploy on what they are believing and that you're kind of an enemy to their situation. They may experience hallucinations, auditory, visual, tactile, or olfactory, hearing, seeing, feeling, or smelling things that are not actually there and that other people can experience. Disorganized speech, so saying things that do not make sense, using made up words that have no meaning, that kind of word salad or tangential speech where they jump from topic to topic to topic to topic to topic, and they kind of spin you around and you're not really able to see what in particular they're trying to say, and it doesn't really make sense in the context of what we're talking about. We're talking about the exam. I'm talking about water. I'm talking about Sharpies. I'm talking about implicit bias, and then my wallet, and then my phone. And then we get into presidents, aliens, and then just, and you're kind of lost in where they're at. And then disorganized or grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior. So repetitive or senseless movements adopt and impose, which can be maintained for hours. The individual may resist efforts to be moved into a different position or assume the same new position for hours as well. Pacing, walking in circles, writing constantly, writing letters to people, feeling like they're reaching top executives of different situations, repetitive movements with no rhyme or reason. So rocking back and forth, just flapping around, just doing whatever they need to do. So those are the positive symptoms. So if you think of somebody that's very positive, they're upbeat and have a lot of energy, that's what the person's mind is doing or their body is doing. They're moving around and doing all these different things. And then the negative symptoms on the other end are different situations that if you think of somebody that's negative or has low energy, they would be experiencing these. So lack of energy, poor hygiene or lack of grooming, loss of interest in things that they would have enjoyed, withdrawal from family, friends, and social situations and activities. And then the specifiers here is schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder or psychotic features have been ruled out because either no major depressive or manic episodes occurred concurrently with the active phase symptoms, or mood episodes have occurred during active phase symptoms. They've been present for a minority of the total duration. So the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition. And then the last level of the schizophrenia spectrum is schizophrenia. So if you think about it, brief psychotic disorder was 30 days or less. Schizophreniform was 30 days or more, yet less than 6 months. So the top and end of the spectrum would be 6 months or longer. So the criteria requirement is the same as schizophreniform. They have to have at least 2 of the following symptoms for 6 months or longer. So schizophreniform and schizophrenia are the exact same, with the main difference being the length of time. So as we discussed in schizophreniform, symptoms 1 to 4 are the positive symptoms. So if you think of high energy and the mind's going 100 miles an hour, and symptoms 5 through 8 are considered negative symptoms, which are low energy and they have no progression or want to do anything in general. So the first up to bat is delusions, so false beliefs that are not based in reality, and the person refuses to give them up even when presented with factual information. Again, key emphasis on even when presented with factual information. Other people are giving them evidence and showing them different things that are true. They're not really believing it. They're hell-bent in their own ways. Hallucinations, so hearing, seeing, feeling, or smelling things that are not actually there, or auditory, visual, tactile, or olfactory sensations that other people aren't actually experiencing. Disorganized speech, so saying things that do not make sense, using made up words that have no meaning, and having topic to topic to topic or tangential speech of where no one is really able to make sense of what they're actually saying. Grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, repetitive senseless movements, adopt and oppose, in which may be maintained for hours. The individual may resist efforts to be moved into a different position or will assume the new position for hours as well. They may have pacing. They may be walking in circles, writing constantly or writing letters to people that they feel that they can actually reach or trying to get to government officials, repetitive movements with no rhyme or reason. So let's segue into the negative symptoms where lack of energy, poor hygiene or lack of grooming, loss of interest in things that they would have enjoyed, or withdrawal from family, friends, and social situations. And the specifiers here are a significant portion of the time since the onset of the disturbance. Level of functioning in one or more major areas, such as work, interpersonal relations, or self care, has been below the level achieved prior to the onset of the symptoms. So they've had a regression after the onset of their symptoms for 6 months or longer. Schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder with psychotic features have been ruled out because either there are no major depressive or manic episodes occurred concurrently with the active phase symptoms, or if mood episodes have occurred during active phase symptoms, they've been present for a minority of the total duration, and the disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition. So those are easy ways to remember the depressive disorders and antidepressant medications. So, major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, the anti anxiety medications and anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, separation anxiety disorder, panic disorder, the mood stabilizers and mood disorders, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, and the differences between those, ADHD medications and ADHD inattention, ADHD, hyperactivity, and impulsivity in the combined presentation, and then the antipsychotics in the schizophrenia spectrum, brief psychotic disorder, schizophreniform, and schizophrenia. So those are just easy ways to be able to recognize and apply the information. But again, the goal is not to memorize and know every nick and cranny, be able to walk in the exam, kick it in the chest by being able to recognize and apply the information. Question 1. A social worker in an outpatient clinic is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old male who reports finding it difficult to handle all the responsibilities in his life. The man reports that he's been working at his current job for 5 years and that he always feels like he's going to be fired. The man reports that he often feels the urge to hurt people and that when he is not at home, he will lock himself in the house to prevent himself from acting on his thoughts. The man reports that he was previously hospitalized 1 year ago due to experiencing feelings of hopelessness. What is the most likely medication to improve the man's situation? A. Clozaril, B. Valium, C. Depakote, or D. Celexa? And when you have your answer, type the word happy in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is A. Third place is D. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. We're a social worker, outpatient clinic, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're completing an intake assessment any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. Our client is a 13-5-year-old male, so that is our client, 35-year-old male. He reports finding it difficult to handle all the responsibilities in his life. The man reports he has been working at his current job for 5 years, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So it's been going on for 5 years that he always feels like he's going to be fired. So it could be some paranoia at this moment because there's evidence that he's not. The man reports that he often feels the urge to hurt people when he's not at work and will lock himself in the house to prevent himself from acting on the different things in his life. And the man reports that he has previously hospitalized 1 year ago due to experiencing feelings of hopelessness. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So 1 year ago, he was in the hospital. What is the most likely medication to improve the man's situation? So let's define each medication, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, Clozaril is an antipsychotic. B, Valium is an anti-anxiety medication. C, Depakote is a mood stabilizer. And then D, Celexa is an antidepressant medication. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Social worker, outpatient clinic, completing an intake assessment any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. 35-year-old male, reports finding it difficult to handle all the responsibilities in his life. He's been at his current job for 5 years. He always feels like he's going to be fired, so we may have some paranoia. Often feels the urge to hurt people. When he's not at work, he's locking himself in the house to prevent himself from acting on the thoughts. And he reports he was previously hospitalized 1 year ago, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. And he was experiencing feelings of hopelessness. So keep all that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because yes, it does say feelings of hopelessness, but it doesn't really have any other depressive symptoms that we can think of. We have him being overwhelmed. Yeah, we have some paranoia or anxiety. He has the urge to hurt people. He's locking himself in the house or isolating himself. He was hospitalized. So there's that clinically significant impact. So we're going to rule out D because we're not seeing any depressive symptoms besides feelings of hopelessness. We're going to rule out B. Why? Because we're not really seeing any anxiety symptoms. And if we are seeing any anxiety symptoms, it's feeling like he's going to be fired, which could be paranoia at this moment because it's been so long, which could be a delusion when even presented with factual information. That is jading his perspective of what he's actually seeing in his situation. So now we're in between A, Clozaril, or C, Depakote. So now we have to ask ourselves, does he have a psychotic disorder or does he have a mood disorder of some sort? So if we think about it, he's feeling overwhelmed. He's been at his job for 5 years. He's feeling like he's going to get fired. So he may have some paranoia or delusions. He's having the urge to hurt people. So he may be having external stimuli of what's going on in the situation. And he was hospitalized. But we do not see any telltale mania or manic episodes. And if it's over a huge stretch of time, we often see swings within the situation. So for that reason, we're going to rule out C and we're going to go with A because we're more or less looking at a psychotic disorder. So we would have to go with the antipsychotic medication to help improve the situation. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 2. An emergency department social worker is completing an intake assessment with a 40-year-old female who reports feeling like nothing will ever get better. The woman reports that she's been finding it difficult to keep her thoughts straight and that there is not enough time in the day to accomplish everything she would like to. The woman reports that she's been avoiding her friends since she feels like they're going to make fun of her or hurt her in some way. The woman reports having nightmares and constantly worrying about everything. Which medication is the doctor most likely going to prescribe the woman? A. Clozapine, B. Clozapam, C. Bupropion, or D. Depakote. And when you have your answer, type the word joy into the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is C and D. Let's look at it. We're an emergency department social worker, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're completing an intake assessment any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So it's our first time meeting with a 40-year-old female. So that is our client, and she's reporting like nothing will ever get better. So some hopelessness. The woman reports that she has been finding it difficult to keep her thoughts straight, and she's not had enough time in the day to accomplish everything that she would like. So maybe some flight of idea or distractibility. The woman reports that she's been avoiding her friends and feels like they're going to make fun of her or hurt her in some way. So maybe some paranoia at that time. And the woman reports having nightmares and constantly worrying about everything. So kind of a detrimental look. Then what medications is the doctor most likely going to be prescribing the woman? So let's define each medication, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at. A, clozapine, which would also be clozaril, which is an antipsychotic medication. INE, either going to be an antidepressant or antipsychotic. Clozapam, if we look at that, PAM or LAM, we're going to be looking at an anti-anxiety, which would be Klonopin. PAM needs anxiety meds to handle her LAM, which would be anti-anxiety meds. And then bupropion, it's going to be Wellbutrin, and Wellbutrin is going to help someone feel well within their situation. So with this one, we're looking at an antidepressant, and Depakote is going to be a mood stabilizer. So let's look back at our question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review: emergency department social worker, an emergency department social worker, and an emergency department social worker. So our job is a quick tap and go type philosophy, and we're completing an intake assessment any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So it's our first time meeting with a 40-year-old female. She reports feeling like nothing will ever get better, so feeling hopeless and or on edge. She reports that she's finding it difficult to keep her thoughts straight and that there's not enough time in the day to accomplish everything that she would like to. She reports she's been avoiding her friends. She feels like people are going to make fun of her, hurt her in some way, maybe some anxiety, maybe some paranoia. And she's having sleep disturbances by having nightmares and constantly worrying about everything. So keep that all in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because Wellbutrin or bupropion is more long lasting, and we don't really see any depressive symptoms within this. We have some sleep disturbance, but that's not enough to say that she has major depressive disorder or persistent depressive disorder. We're also going to rule out A. Why? Because there's no psychosis within this situation. There's no delusions. There's no catatonic or repetitive behavior. There's no hallucination. There's no disorganized speech. Nothing like that is present. So now we're in between B, Klonopin, or Depakote. So if we think about this, is this woman more manic or more anxious? And what does our setting have to say about it? So we have a person that is in the emergency department, first time there, or emergency department, having an intake. Nothing's getting better. Thoughts are running 100 miles an hour. She's feeling like people are going to make fun of her or hurt her in some way. Sleep disturbance, and constantly worrying. So if we think about this person coming into the emergency room, the job is to assess, stabilize, and discharge as fast as we can. We're looking for a quick solution. Do we want a long-lasting med, such as Depakote, or do we want a quick-acting med, like a Klonopin or anti-anxiety med? So for that reason, we're going to rule out D and go with B, because she's in the emergency department and we need a quick solution to the problem, and an anti-anxiety med is going to stabilize her, calm her down, and then we'd be able to understand more what's going on. And if we give her a Depakote, that's going to have more long acting, and we'd have to ensure continuation of the med, which we don't have that at this given moment. So based on the symptoms, we'd want to stabilize her and then transition her to something else. But the first med up to bat would be an anti-anxiety med because it's quick, because we're in the emergency department and she could be experiencing anxiety or mania. But the correct answer here is B. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 3. A social worker in a community mental health agency is meeting with a 28-year-old male upon discharge from a hospital for a suicide attempt. The man reports feeling like, regardless of what he does, that he will never be good enough. The man reports his mother recently died and that his girlfriend broke up with him last month. The man reports utilizing alcohol to cope with all of his stressors. The man would like to find ways to improve his mood and to stop losing everything. What medication would be best supplement his treatment? A. Effexor, B. Ativan, C. Haldol, or D. Adderall. And when you have your answer, type the word coffee in the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is C. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in a community mental health agency. So that's who we are and where we are at. We're meeting with a 28-year-old male. So that is our client upon discharge from a hospital for a suicide attempt. So that is the setting and situation we're looking at. He reports feeling like, regardless of what he does, he's never good enough. So low self esteem. The man reports his mother recently died and that his girlfriend broke up with him last month, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it helps paint the picture of what we're looking at. So last month, both of those events happened. The man reports utilizing alcohol to cope with all of his stressors. So alcohol is his main coping skill. And the man would like to find ways to improve his mood and to stop losing everything. What medication would best supplement his treatment? So let's define each medication, compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, Effexor. If we think about effects, it positively affects the person's mood. So this is going to be an antidepressant. B, key emphasis on van. Why? Because this is where we beat it up and throw it in a van. So this is where we're going to beat up the anxiety, throw it in the van to drive it away for our anti-anxiety med. Haldol is going to be an antipsychotic. And then D, Adderall is going to be an ADHD medication. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review. Social worker, community mental health agency, 28-year-old male, upon discharge from a hospital for a suicide attempt. So there may be some depression going on. Man reports feeling like regardless of what he does, he's never good enough. So there's low self-esteem. He recently had 2 losses. His mother passed away and his girlfriend broke up with him the last month. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. He's utilizing alcohol to cope with everything, and he would like to find ways to improve his mood and to stop losing everything. So keep that all in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because Adderall is for people who have ADHD. And yes, this person's feeling depressed, but we're not going to give them a stimulant to build them up and give them more energy. So ADHD is ruled out because we're looking at somebody that had a suicide attempt, has low self-esteem, had some loss. He's utilizing alcohol to cope with everything, and he wants to improve his mood. So we need to be focusing on the mood, not inattention, not hyperactivity or impulsivity. For that reason as well, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because it doesn't have any symptoms of the schizophrenia spectrum, no hallucinations, no delusions, no catatonic disorganized speech or behaviors. So now we're looking in between A, Effexor, antidepressant, or B, Ativan. And if we look back at the question, because the question is always going to tell us the answer, and we want to be able to make sure that we connect our answer back to the question, we don't really see any anxiety symptoms. So for that reason, we're going to rule out B. We're going to go with A, Effexor. Why? Because it positively affects the person's mood because they had a suicide attempt. They have low self-esteem. They've had some great losses in the past month. They're utilizing alcohol to cope with things, and they want to improve their mood. So we have to meet our client where they're at and give them an antidepressant. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 4. A social worker in a family agency is meeting with a father and his 8-year-old son who has been having issues in school. The father reports that the son's teacher has told him that the boy finds it difficult to complete his work and will often interrupt others while speaking. The boy reports that he finds school boring and that he just wants to spend time with his friends. The father would like his son to attend a psychiatrist appointment. What medication is most likely to be prescribed to the boy? A, Vyvanse, B, Buspar, C, Wellbutrin, or D, Abilify. And when you have your answer, type the word determination in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is D. Third place is B and C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker and a family agency, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're meeting with the father and his 8-year-old son, but from the looks of it, the 8-year-old son is going to be our client. Why? Because they're saying that he's having issues in school, and the father's likely not in school. The father reports, so not our client, but somebody accompanying him, says that the son's teachers told him that the boy finds it difficult to complete his work and he's often interrupting others while speaking. The boy reports, so our client says that he finds school boring and just wants to spend time with his friends. And the father would like to have his son attend a psychiatrist appointment. What medication is most likely to be prescribed to the boy? So let's define each medication, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, Vyvanse would be for ADHD. Buspar helps a person to feel more on par. So this one, we're looking at an anti-anxiety. C, Wellbutrin helps the person to feel well. So this is going to be an antidepressant. Well, they want their mood to feel well. And Abilify helps to improve the person's ability to handle their psychosis and or mood, because this can be a mood stabilizer or antipsychotic. So it's an antipsychotic first, but mood stabilizer as well. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, family agency, father, 8-year-old son. Our client is the 8-year-old son. Our client is the 8-year-old son. And our client is the 8-year-old son who's been having issues in school. The father reports, so not our client, that the son's teacher has told him the boy finds it difficult to complete his work. He's interrupting others while speaking. And the boy states he finds school boring. He just wants to spend time with his friends, and the father wants him to see a psychiatrist. So, what medication are we looking at here? So, keep that all in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because he's 8 years old and that's a heavy hitter to be given an 8-year-old. So we're seeing no psychosis. We're seeing no mood disorders. So that's where you got to be careful of, just because it looks like a good answer doesn't mean it actually is. Because if we give an 8-year-old this, we are going to be very unethical. So now we're looking at A, Vyvanse, B, Buspar, or C, Wellbutrin. And if we look back at the question, we don't see any depressive symptoms. So that's going to be ruled out. And then we have to ask ourselves, is this more inattention and hyperactivity, impulsivity, or anxiety? So it says that he's finding it difficult to complete his work and he's interrupting other people while speaking. So we're looking more at the ADHD realm than anxiety, because it doesn't say that he's worried about anything. Doesn't say that he falls into any of the classes of the anxiety disorders. There's no separation anxiety, no social anxiety, or anything like that. So that's where we're going to rule out B, and we're going to be going with A, Vyvanse, to help the inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity. Because if we think about it, having issues at school, teachers saying that there's problems with completing work, he's interrupting other people, and he says it's boring and he just wants to go somewhere besides school. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 5. A social worker in an outpatient setting is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old male who reports feeling like his friends are out to get him. The man reports that he's not been sleeping well for the past 8 days and that it feels like his mind will not shut off. The man reports spending money that he does not have and that he feels pressured to engage in conversation with everyone he meets. And the man reports having a history of hospitalization and that he has been arrested for getting into fights with people. What medication would best treat the man's symptoms? A, Abilify, B, Invega, C, Xanax, or D, Zoloft. And when you have your answer, type the word pen in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is C. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient setting, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're completing an intake assessment. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So it's our first time working with a 35-year-old male, and what he came in for is feeling like his friends are out to get him. So some paranoia. The man reports that he has not been sleeping well for the past 8 days, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at, and it feels like his mind's not shutting off. So we have some flight of idea, thoughts running through his head faster than he can keep up. The man reports spending money that he does not have and feels pressured to engage in conversation with everyone that he meets. So pressured speech and activities that could be risky. The man reports having a history of hospitalization and that he's been arrested for getting into fights with people. What medication would best treat the man's symptoms? So let's identify each medication, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. Abilify improves someone's ability to handle their mood and or psychosis because it is a antipsychotic, but also doubles as a mood stabilizer. Invega is an antipsychotic. Xanax helps to X out the person's anxiety. So it's an anti-anxiety med. Again, key emphasis on X because it X's it out. Zoloft helps to loft the person's mood to be more positive. So this is where we're looking at an antidepressant. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review, social worker, outpatient setting, completing an intake assessment, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. 35-year-old male, reports feeling like his friends are out to get him. So some paranoia for light of idea. Man reports he has not been sleeping well for the past 8 days, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So there's sleep disturbance. He feels like his mind's not shutting off. So some flight of idea. He reports spending money that he does not have. So there's a clinically significant impact and increased goal-oriented activity and activities that could be risky. Feels pressured to have conversations with everyone that he meets. And if you picture somebody right now, they're digging with the shovel very quickly because he has a history of hospitalization and was arrested for getting in fights with people. So that has a clinical significant impact. So keep all that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out Xanax or anti-anxiety because the person has a little bit more intense of a disorder than anxiety. It does say that he has the flight of idea and constant worrying on edge, but there's another medication and disorder that would better explain the situation. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because it doesn't say that there's any depressive disorders in any way, shape, or form. It does say there's a history of hospitalization, but we don't know why. So we don't want to assume it's hopelessness or anything like that. So there are no other depressive symptoms besides not sleeping well, but that's not going to be one that we'd be able to tag onto. So now we're looking at Abilify. So do we think this guy's experienced a manic episode or that he's psychotic or solely that he is psychotic? So if we look back, do we see any delusions? Do we see any hallucinations, any disorganized or catatonic behavior, disorganized speech? We don't really see that. So we're going to rule out B. And this person exhibits more of a mood disorder or manic episode because we have that fear of people out to get them, not sleeping well. So sleep disturbance, 8 days. So bipolar 1, manic episode, 1 week or longer, flight of idea, spending money it doesn't have, clinically significant impact, risky behavior, feeling pressured to engage in conversation. So talkativeness, history of hospitalization. So that clinically significant impact. So the correct answer here is going to be Abilify because it helps improve their ability to handle their mood and their psychosis, but there's not really psychosis, but Abilify would be a mood stabilizer as well. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 6. A social worker in an outpatient clinic is working with a 38-year-old female who reports having difficulty sleeping for the past 2 weeks. The woman reports that she has been getting a lot of ideas of what she can do in her life and that she cannot keep up with them all. The woman reports that she has spent all of her money on materials to advance her life and is now at risk for losing her house. The woman has never been hospitalized and denies ever being on medications. What is the most likely diagnosis for this woman? A, bipolar 1 disorder, B, bipolar 2 disorder, C, generalized anxiety disorder, or D, schizophrenia form. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're grateful for right now. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third place is C. Fourth place is D. Let's look at it. We're a social worker, outpatient clinic, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're working with a 38-year-old female, so that is our client who reports having difficulty sleeping for the past 2 weeks, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at. So all of the symptoms that she's been having are for the past 2 weeks. The woman reports that she's been getting a lot of ideas what she can do in her life, so kind of increased goal-oriented activity, and that she cannot keep up with them all, so distractibility or lack of concentration. One reports she spent all of her money on materials to advance her life, so increased goal-oriented activity, and now is at risk of losing her house. The woman has never been hospitalized or been on medications. What is the most likely diagnosis for this woman? So let's break down each diagnosis, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. First up to bat, A, bipolar 1 disorder is going to have mania or hypomania episodes. So mania is going to be associated with the most common one is 1 week or longer. Why? Because it takes on the name of the disorder. So bipolar 1, 1 week or longer. And within that, we're going to have hypomania, which is associated with bipolar 2. Bipolar 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, or it's the second version, which is going to be 4 days or longer. And then this is how we're going to differentiate it between bipolar 2, is it does not require an episode of depression, but it does require a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. So let's keep this going for bipolar 2, because as we stated before, there's going to be a lot of similarities. So bipolar 2 is often associated with just hypomania. Bipolar 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, or since it's the second version and sequels of movies tend to be less, it's half of the first version. So half a week is 4 days or longer. And it does require an episode of depression, but it does not require a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. C, generalized anxiety disorder is going to be 6 months or longer. And the symptoms that we're looking at here: irritability, worrying about multiple things at the same time, fatigue, and lack of concentration. And the schizophrenia form is where we're going to see longer than 1 month, yet less than 6 months. And this is where we're going to have the positive symptoms: delusions, hallucinations, catatonic, and or disorganized behaviors, and or disorganized speech. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review: social worker, outpatient clinic, 38-year-old female, reports having difficulty sleeping for the past 2 weeks. The woman reports that she's been getting a lot of ideas that she can do in her life. She cannot keep up with all of them. She spends all of the money that she has. Now she's at risk of being homeless or losing her house, and she's never been hospitalized and denies ever being on medications. So keep all that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because the length of time is 2 weeks, doesn't have any other picture. So for that reason, we're also going to rule out schizophrenia form. So generalized anxiety disorder would be that she has irritability, worrying about multiple things. She's tired. She's lacking concentration. So she does lack concentration, but she doesn't have any of the other symptoms. Schizophrenia, the positive symptoms that we had cited to help rule it out. Of course, it has negative symptoms as well, but those aren't cited as well. So there's no delusions, no hallucinations, no catatonic disorganized behaviors and or disorganized speech, and the negative symptoms, lack of interest, lack of hygiene, isolating themselves, etc., are not present in this. So now we're fighting in between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder. So we have difficulty sleeping. So there's sleep disturbance, which is present in both of them, past 2 weeks. So they're both involved in the game still. She's getting a lot of ideas, which would include both of them. She cannot keep up with them. Distractibility, which is included in both of them. She spent all of her money and is now at risk of losing her house. That's where one of these starts to become very challenged, because if you're losing your house, it would say that there's a clinically significant impact. So bipolar 1 requires a clinically significant impact. So that one's in the fight. Bipolar 2 disorder does not require a clinically significant impact. So that one starts to lose some standing. And if we look further, there are no episodes of depression. So that puts the stake into bipolar 2 disorder and would make us more likely to go with bipolar 1 disorder. Even though it says they've never been hospitalized, it doesn't mean that they haven't had a clinically significant impact within their functioning. They are now at risk of losing their house, and that could be very detrimental to their situation based on the fact that they got into a manic episode and gave everything that they had, and now they're at risk. So the correct answer here is A. And again, bipolar 1 has that clinically significant impact. Bipolar 2 does not, and they have to have an episode of depression. Bipolar 1 doesn't require that. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 7. A social worker in a community mental health clinic is meeting with a mother and her 9-year-old son who is having behavioral issues at school for the past 6 months. The mother reports that her son has been sent home multiple times for pushing other children while waiting in lines, will run around the classroom when completed with his work, and interrupt other people while they are talking. The child reports that he does not like other people and feels like they are too slow and need to stay out of his way. What diagnosis best explains the boy's behavior? A. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. B. Separation anxiety disorder. C. Generalized anxiety disorder. Or D. Oppositional defiant disorder. And when you have your answer, type one positive thing about yourself in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is D. Third place is C. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in a community mental health clinic. So that's who we are and where we are at. We're meeting with the mother and the 9-year-old son, but it looks like the 9-year-old son is going to be our client. Why? Because it's discussing behavioral issues at school for the past 6 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. The mother reports, so it's not our client, that the son has been sent home from school multiple times for pushing other children while waiting in lines, running around the classroom when his work is completed, and interrupting other people while they are communicating. And the child reports he does not like other people and they are too slow and need to stay out of his way. What diagnosis best explains the boy's behavior? Select break down each diagnosis, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in this particular situation. A, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We're going to be seeing lack of patience, not being able to sit still in environments where it is necessary, not being able to focus on one task at a time, and will appear to have a motor inside of them. And this is going to be 6 months or longer. Separation anxiety disorder is when someone will worry about a parent, caregiver, or significant person in their life being harmed, fixated on the potential of them leaving them, and they will become distressed when they are away from or anticipate being away from them. And since it is a child, it is going to be 4 weeks or longer, but for our adults, it'd be 6 months or longer. But for this sake, it's going to be 4 weeks or longer. C, generalized anxiety disorder is going to be 6 months or longer. And the symptoms will be seen here: irritability, constant worry, worrying about multiple things at the same time, feeling on edge, and worrying. And we'll just put fatigue here just to cap it off. And 6 months or longer is the length of time. Oppositional defiant disorder is when a child will be defiant towards people of authority and they will not care about respecting others. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, community mental health clinic, meeting with the mother and 9-year-old son. Son's having behavioral issues at school for the past 6 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. The mom says that the son has been sent home multiple times, pushing other children while waiting in lines, running around the classroom when completed with his work, interrupting other people when they're talking. He's saying, I don't like other people. They're too slow. I have a motor inside me and they need to get out of my way. Which diagnosis best explains the boy's behavior? So keep all of that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because if it said that he was just trying to be defiant towards his teacher, but he's saying he doesn't like anyone and that they just need to stay out of his way. So his behaviors of pushing other children while waiting in lines could just be the lack of patience, running around the classroom when completed. Doesn't have anything to do with him defying people of authority and or his teacher. So D is going to be ruled out. We're also going to rule out B. Why? Because it doesn't say that any of his behaviors are related to being away from his mom or his father or his significant people in his life. It's pushing people while waiting in lines, running around the classroom, interrupting other people. And he says he doesn't like other people and they're too slow. So it has nothing to do with anxiety related to being separated from anybody or that he feels like something bad's going to happen to anybody. So now we're in between A, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or C, generalized anxiety disorder. So is he anxious in general, or does he have lack of patience, not being able to sit still in environments where it's necessary, not able to focus on one thing, appears like he has a motor inside of him, fidgeting and tapping, doing all these different things. So for that reason, we're going to rule out C and go with A. Why? Because he has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder based on the symptoms that were described. He's pushing people over while waiting in lines. He's jumping and running around the classroom, interrupting other people, and he just wants to get going and doing and jumping from task to task because people are in his way. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 8. A social worker in a community mental health clinic has been working with a 21-year-old male for the past 3 months. The man reports hearing voices that tell him to hurt his parents and that they will have caused him to isolate from social situations. The man reports finding it difficult to sleep and that he feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. The man denies ever being hospitalized and that he can keep his symptoms under control. What would be the most likely diagnosis for this man? A, social anxiety disorder. B, brief psychotic disorder, C, schizophreniform, or D, schizophrenia. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to next week. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is D. Third place is B. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in a community mental health clinic, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're working with a 21-year-old male, so that is our client. For the past 3 months, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. The man reports hearing voices that tell him to hurt his parents, and they've caused him to isolate from social situations. So he's having auditory hallucinations and isolating himself. Man reports finding it difficult to sleep, and he feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. So some paranoia or delusions. And the man denies ever being hospitalized and that he can keep his situation under control. So let's define each diagnosis, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. Social anxiety disorder, key emphasis on social. Why? Because this is when someone will become anxious in one or more social situations for fear that they will be criticized or judged in some way. And this is where we're going to be seeing 6 months or longer. Brief psychotic disorder, key emphasis on brief. Why? Because this is going to be a brief amount of time, so 30 days or less. And this is where we're going to see the positive symptoms and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Within that, we're going to be having more, less severe, based on the fact that it requires only one of them, which is typically the positive symptoms. Schizophrenia form is the pre-form of schizophrenia. So it's in between brief and schizophrenia. Why? It's the pre-form. And within that, it's going to be longer than 30 days, yet less than 6 months. And it's also going to have the positive and negative symptoms included in that. So positive symptoms, hallucinations, delusions, catatonic behavior, disorganized speech, and then negative symptoms, isolating himself, lack of interest, lack of hygiene, low moods, schizophrenia, So the top of it is going to be 6 months or longer, and those are going to be the positive and negative symptoms as well. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, community mental health clinic, 21-year-old male, past 3 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. He reports hearing voices, so auditory hallucinations. Tell him to hurt his parents, caused him to isolate, what could be a part of the negative symptoms, keeping away from families and friends. The man reports finding it difficult to sleep, so some sleep disturbance, feels like people from his dreams are going to hurt him, so maybe delusions. The man denies ever being hospitalized and feels like he can keep his symptoms under control. So keep all that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because he says he's hearing voices, and yes, he's isolating himself from social situations, but not based on him being criticized or demeaned or judged in any way. He's more worried about hurting people based on hearing voices that tell him to do so. So for that reason, A is going to be ruled out. So now we have to look back at the length of time, which is 3 months. We don't have any other standards but 3 months. So for that reason, B is going to be ruled out. Why? Because that's 30 days or less. We're looking at 3 months, which is 3 times as long. And we're also going to rule out D. Why? Because that's twice as long as he's been experiencing, because that's 6 months or longer. So the correct answer here is going to be the preform, because it's in between brief psychotic disorder, 30 days or less, and 6 months or longer. So 3 months is going to fall right into that. So the correct answer here is schizophreniform, which is C. So that's how we'd look at that question in particular. Question 9. A social worker is meeting with a 55-year-old female who reported not feeling like herself. The woman reports that her husband passed away 1.5 years ago and that she took it pretty hard. She reports that she did not leave her house for 6 months, did not find pleasure in anything, stopped attending church, and would have missed Christmas last year if her children did not drive to her house and convince her to go. The woman reports that right when she started to feel better, that her daughter was killed in a car crash 3 months ago, which brought back all of her depression. What diagnosis best explains what the woman is experiencing? A, persistent depressive disorder. B, major depressive disorder. C, generalized anxiety disorder. Or D, adjustment disorder with depressed mood. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're blessed to have in your life right now. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker that's meeting with a 55-year-old female. So that's our client. Doesn't really say where we're at, but we're in the office. Reported not feeling like herself. The woman reports that her husband passed away a year and a half ago, and she took it pretty hard. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So a year and a half ago, her husband passed away. She reported that she did not leave her house for 6 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. She did not find pleasure in anything, stopped attending church, and she would have missed Christmas last year if her children did not come and get her. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we are looking at. So last year, she would have missed Christmas. The woman reports that right when she started to feel better, so she had a period of feeling better, that her daughter was killed in a car crash 3 months ago. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at. So 3 months ago, her symptoms got worse, which brought back all the depression. So let's break down each diagnosis, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A persistent depressive disorder is 2 years or longer because, again, she's not a child or adolescent because child and adolescent would be a year or longer. She's an adult, so it's 2 years or longer of depressive symptoms. Major depressive disorder, it's a major event. And since the number 2, because there's 2 diagnoses, this is going to be 2 weeks or longer of depressive symptoms. Generalized anxiety disorder is going to be 6 months or longer of anxiety symptoms. D, adjustment disorder with depressed mood, is going to be symptoms within 1 to 3 months, yet not longer than 6 months. And the main kicker here is the reaction is beyond what is normally expected. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Social worker, 55-year-old female. She's not feeling like herself. She reports her husband passed away a year and a half ago. She took it pretty hard. She reports that she did not leave her house for 6 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So husband passed away a year and a half ago. She hasn't left her house for 6 months. She didn't find pleasure in things. She avoided going to church. She would have missed Christmas last year if her children didn't come and get her. She has supports. She reports that right when she started to get better, so she had a period of no depressive symptoms. Her daughter was killed in a car crash 3 months ago. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. And then all of her depression came back. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because she's not anxious in general, doesn't have any anxiety symptoms in any way, shape, or form. So that's going to be ruled out. And the length of time would mesh there, but doesn't really fit the bill. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because the symptoms have to occur within 1 to 3 months, yet not longer than 6 months. And she's been having it for a year and a half and then 3 months. And her reaction has to be beyond what is normally expected. And when it comes to grief, it's kind of unprecedented how long and how people will react. And it's kind of difficult to say, hey, this person should go to Christmas, when that could be a very triggering experience. So that's where we got to get ourselves outside of that, because it's not beyond what is normally expected. She's not really adjusting to it because it was a year and a half ago, didn't leave her house for 6 months. Now we're focusing on the most recent, because she had a period of going without depression. So now we're in between A, persistent, key emphasis on persist because it persists over time, or B, major, it's a major event. And if we think back to the difference between these two, a year and a half ago, 6 months, 3 months, I often do not see 2 years or longer, as well as if you remember back to persistent depressive disorder, there cannot be a period of longer than 2 months without symptoms, because if it does, it resets back to major depressive disorder. So for that reason, it never hit the 2 year mark, because she had a period of where it was going well. And then 3 months ago, it got worse. So we're looking at major depressive disorder rather than persistent. It was getting close to the persistent, but we did not want to add that it was 2 years or longer. And she likely had more. She had a period of being without symptoms for longer than 2 months, because she said things got better. And then 3 months ago, things got worse. So the correct answer here is B, major depressive disorder. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 10. A social worker in an outpatient clinic is meeting with a 29-year-old male for concerns of excessive anger. The man reports that whenever he is away from his wife, that he constantly worries about her and that he feels like someone is going to hurt her. The man reports that he calls her phone constantly, which has caused arguments in the relationship. The man reports that he cares about his wife and is unsure how to improve his situation to stay in the relationship. What is the most likely diagnosis for the man? A, generalized anxiety disorder. B, separation anxiety disorder. C, schizophrenia. Or D, panic disorder. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from the session tonight. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic. So that's who we are and where we are at. We're meeting with a 29-year-old male. So that is our client for concerns of excessive anger. So that is the presenting issue. The man reports that whenever he's away from his wife, that he'll constantly worry about her and feels like someone is going to hurt her. So hyperprotectivity over his wife or hypervigilance. Man reports that he calls her phone constantly, which has caused arguments in the relationship. So just constantly needing reassurance that she is okay. The man reports that he cares about his wife and is unsure how to improve his situation to stay in the relationship. So he wants to improve the situation in the best way he can. What is the most likely diagnosis for the man? So let's break down each diagnosis, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, generalized anxiety disorder is going to be 6 months or longer of symptoms. And we're going to be seeing irritability, constant worry, lack of concentration, muscle tension, fatigue, worrying about multiple things, separation anxiety, key emphasis on separation, because this is when they are separated. So the length of time is going to be 6 months or longer. And this is when someone worries about a significant attachment figure when they are away from them and they fear that someone will hurt them in some way. They become distressed when they are away from or anticipate being away from them. Schizophrenia, 6 months or longer. And this is where we're going to be seeing the positive symptoms: hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech, disorganized or catatonic behaviors. And the negative symptoms as well: lack of energy, lack of hygiene, isolation, etc. Panic disorder are going to be the physiological symptoms associated with anxiety, fear of having another panic attack, and or avoiding situations that remind them of the sensation of having a panic attack. And this is going to be 30 days or longer. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, outpatient clinic, 29-year-old male, concerns of excessive worry whenever he's away from his wife, whenever he's away from his wife, whenever he's away from his wife. He'll constantly worry about her and feels like someone's going to hurt her. He calls her phone constantly, which causes arguments in the relationship. The man reports that he cares about his wife and is unsure how to improve the situation to stay in the relationship. So keep all that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because it doesn't say he has delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, or disorganized or catatonic behavior, or the negative symptoms: lack of hygiene, low moods, isolation, lack of interest in things that they would have enjoyed, etc. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because it does not describe a single physiological symptom in any way, shape, or form. Doesn't say that he's had a history of panic attacks. Doesn't say that he fears having another panic attack or anything like that. So that's going to be ruled out. So now we need to ask ourselves, Do we need to think that he's anxious in general or only anxious when he's separated from somebody? So let's look back at the question. So whenever he's away from his wife, he constantly worries about her and feels like someone's going to hurt her. Okay. Is that anxious in general? Possibly. But it's seeming like when he's separated from her, and then he's calling her phone. So it's all fixated on her and things related to her. So for that reason, we're going to rule out A, even though he's becoming irritable, it's causing fights, he's constantly worrying. It's more focused on the separation and something happening to her. So that way he would no longer be in the relationship with her. So the correct answer here is B, separation anxiety disorder, because when he's separated from a significant person, which is his wife, that he's worrying something's going to happen to her. She's going to be harmed. He's not going to have her in his life. So the correct answer here is B. So that's how we look at that question in particular.